Welcome everybody back to my channel. So today I was going to do a short solo video on my stance on Masteron and how this might have changed from things I previously said. I don't think this is going to be a groundbreaking video. So I'll give a little background on Masteron first for people who don't quite understand what Masteron is. Masteron is a DHT-derived anabolic steroid. It was first described in 1959. And FDA approved in the United States in 1961 and then subsequently 1962 in Europe. It was kind of discovered and developed by both Syntec in Mexico City and Lilly Pharmaceutical at the same time. And there was a legal battle that ensued over rights of the drug. And the courts ruled that they needed to split proprietary ownership of this drug. So this is why it had so many different trade names, the most common, which is Masteron. It was used in the 1970s and 80s as an adjunct to inoperable breast cancer in women. And then the FDA removed its approval after it came out with what they deemed as better drugs that were not viralizing. So let me think where to go with this. Right before FDA approval for use, when the drug was being developed, it was developed at the same time as Anadrol 50 and what has become known as Superdrol, with is basically oral or methylated dromostanolone. So you had Masteron, which is drostanolone, you had Superdrol, which is methyl drostanolone, and you had Anadrol 50 or oxymethylone. Those three drugs were developed at the same time. And the initial studies on them, there was the initial study on rats, which again doesn't always apply to humans. The initial study done on rats showed the Masteron didn't really grow any tissue. But they did notice that it had some sort of anti-prolific effect on breast tissue. So they put that drug aside, and we're going to revisit that later. They realized that Superdrol or methyl drostanolone was severely liver toxic, and they put that completely to the side on a shelf. And Anadrol 50 seemed to be the most advantageous to use for anemia and anabolic purposes. So they sought FDA approval for Anadrol 50 for that use. And they went back and looked at Masteron and realized that perhaps it had some use in breast cancer. And so that's how it was classified. It was subsequently never studied in men, and it was never studied for anabolism, nor was it ever written or described in any medical textbook as anything that was ever used for tissue growth. It would be considered an anti-prolific agent. And so my original stance on Masteron was that we just don't know if it grows tissue, as it's never been studied or used in that manner. And typically in bodybuilding, it would be used at the last 8 to 10 weeks in a cutting cycle before a show to add some level of hardness and dryness, perhaps to control estrogen. But outside of that, it was typically not used in an off season. It was in the early 2000s. It was very expensive and very hard to come by. And so it was not even used in a lot of guys' cycles. It became much popular in the last, 10, maybe 15 years during show prep. But again, that's how it was used. Until very recently, most guys didn't start using it in off season. And I think a lot of that was born out of people's desire to use things that were safer and the desire to use primobolan, and genuine primobolan can be hard to come by. That a lot of times, unfortunately, is actually equipoise. That's labeled as primobolan. I can do another video about that as well. That kind of explains why there are so many issues with estrogen when using so-called primobolan. Real primobolan does act as an AI to some extent, but it doesn't seem as harsh on estrogen as equipoise. So a lot of times I'm guessing when guys get their estrogen crashed by what they think is primobolan, it's probably equipoise, but that's a whole nother story. So Masteron's use probably came out of the fact that it seemed to be a good replacement for Masteron. It's significantly cheaper to manufacture on an underground lab scale, about a third of the cost. It's generally dosed. It comes in an enanthate version similar to primobolan, and then it's dosed at 200 milligrams per ml versus the standard 100 milligrams per ml for primobolan. So you're getting twice as much actual product or API. Sorry, my video froze. And it just seemed like an overall easy swap. If you couldn't get your hands on primobolan, it was easy enough to add Masteron. So a lot of guys, though, that I know find that Masteron seems to be a little drier and not necessarily the best compound to use when growing. That being said, my initial statements were based on the fact that there is no data in human, especially in men, on any sort of anabolic properties of Masteron. And after talking to John Jewett, and John and I are friends, and we discuss things, at least monthly. We go back and forth with some ideas and bounce things off each other. Just anecdotally, he's shown that it seems to be quite anabolic when used properly. And so I'm just giving it the benefit of doubt and just changing my stance and saying, rather than saying, we don't know, it looks like it is anabolic. But again, there is no data. There's no data change. It will never be studied in that form or fashion. Its pharmaceutical companies are not going to go back and revisit this drug as such. So there is still no proof of that, but it looks to be anabolic. So if people choose to use that as an anabolic in a steroid cycle, so be it. This is not medical advice. I'm not advising anyone use this drug. That's really it. I just want to keep my integrity and stay on top of these things and be as upfront as possible. It's, that's really it. I don't think anything else has really changed in my mind about it. I still think it has a place. I still would, personally, I would say in most cases, if primobolan is available, I would say that would be a preferable anabolic. And I know that, not to put words in other people's mouth, but when John and I discussed this, I believe he felt the same way. So I think it was more out of a function of finding genuine primobolan when it's not available. Masteron seemed like an acceptable anabolic as a substitution. So I hope that kind of clears things up with everyone. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe.